Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Modyo Webinar. Today, we're going to talk about reusable widgets using Modyo. So before we start, let me share my screen. Okay, it seems like I don't have permissions. So for the technical crew, guys, can you help me with the screen share? Great, thank you. Okay, so for this webinar, we have an enabled GitHub repository ready for you to check the files that we're going to use today. You're going to find two different folders. The first one is the images folder, where you can find every image that we're going to use today. And also we have a widgets folder. And in this folder, you can find four different files with two different names. The first one is for banner, which is one of the components that we're going to create today, and the other one is header. And if you may notice, we have the .css and the .html files, so you can use the CSS or the HTML accordingly to the different layers that we work in Modyo. We're gonna work on that later. Now that you have access to the files, remember to download it here. If you don't have any Git client, remember just to download the zip file with all the files that you need. And once you have it, just move it to your project. Okay. So next step is to set up our website. So here I am working in Modyo. And in this case, let me here move a little bit, a couple of things here. Yeah. So let's start creating a new site. And in this case, we can call it reusable. Reusable widgets webinar. You can leave the site realm blank and click on create. Here in Modyo, we have the concept of pages, which is basically any URL that you can access inside your site. So for this example, I'm going to modify these three websites or pages in order to display different widgets. So let's start with home. And the first thing we need to do is just to remove the main widget. In Modyo, we use the concept of widget like Lego blocks, something like we can use different areas or blocks to remove or add different functionalities. In this case, for example, I just want to remove this, but before I can do this, I want to show you a preview on how this site is working. As you can see right now, we only have a blank site with a basic template that we enable by default. So we're going to use a little bit of this default theme. Basically, we're going to use Bootstrap, which is a CSS framework that is already enabled. And let's remove this first block. So once I remove it, if I check on save and refresh my website, you may notice that we basically have a blank site. This is what we're gonna start working. Now that we have that, let's change the other websites or pages. In this case, let's remove it, all the contents, click on save. And we have that one about minimum with some contents that we're going to remove. Good. So basically what we have now, it's a blank page. The next step is to create widgets. As you may notice, we right now have widgets, or at least just remove it. We have widgets that are based on HTML. If you notice, for example, here, I can create a header with a hello world message. And if I click here in save and check the preview tool, here we have the results. Now, this is the most basic widget we have, but we can create widgets that are encapsulated and that we can reuse on different situations. So let's remove this one again and go back to widgets. Here in Modyo, we have a dedicated section called widgets. Let me save changes here. And for this webinar, I'm going to create two different widgets. Let's start with the header. Okay, so in this case, I'm gonna call it header. And if you remember, here in the repository, we have the code for this header. So you can use the CSS and HTML files in the next examples I'm going to use. Actually, I'm gonna use it. Let me just copy here. Okay, so now that I have a new widget, you may notice that we have three different files: JavaScript, a CSS file, and an HTML file. The concept we have for widgets is basically to have an encapsulated modular element that we can deploy anywhere on our page. The best part of that is that we can use it several times. But the thing is that if we use the same code several times, we will have the same results. That is not bad per se, but in some cases, we need to use different options. For example, use the same structure, but including slightly changes. That is what we are gonna learn today in this webinar. But let's start with the basic HTML that I just copied. And if you notice here, I have some dummy text here showing the header text and the secondary text. Let's save it. I'm gonna use the CSS as well. In the style sheet area and going to save it. Now we need to use images for this part of the webinar, but you need to upload it. Let me show you how to do that. Let's go back to sites and find the content model, specifically the assets manager. Here you can just take the folder files that I have in here, the images file. Yeah. So now that you have those images in your system, just drag and drop here. Let me show you an example. Example here, I have a picture on my desktop, and what I need to do is to create a new asset, and you can upload whatever the number files you need. Just move it in here and upload it. In this case, I am not using this file. So I already have all those files in my system and I can use it. Let's go back to the workshop. Okay, so let's go back to sites and click on webinar, widgets, keep on working here on header. We already have the style sheets file and the HTML file. And the next part is that we need to include, for example, as you may notice here, the background image. So in this case, as you may notice, I just include a dummy text, so we can change that part. Just give me a second. We have different ways to include images using Modyo. So let me show you one. I'm going to remove this URL, and now I'm going to use the file that I just uploaded to my file manager. In order to do so, click here where you want to replace the image and find the Asset Manager button. Click there, find the image you want to include. For example, in this case, I want to find the dot pattern that I already uploaded. Let me show you one thing. For example, here, it's not the file that I'm looking for, but just to show you how to use it. In this case, I have two different ways to include my file. The first one is using the URL that I can copy just clicking here in this button, or the liquid tag that will allow me to include the full image tag. In this case, since I'm using CSS, I need just the URL. So just need to copy the file that I'm looking for. And once I copy, paste it in here. Here I already have the dot pattern.png file, which is a pattern that I have for the background image in this element. Okay, let's move on. And I need to include a header image. In this case, I'm going to use a different approach. So what if we need to include different files? For example, I can include a static element here, for example, something like that. Using the asset manager, I can find the plane, for example. So click on the image, copy the image. I can close it and come here and include the static file. This could work. If I can save it, check. Yeah, this could work. So let's try how this will look on our website. Yeah. And I have a preview tool that show me how it works. And if you may notice, I have here the image that I just included here, and also the header and secondary text, which is the dummy text that included, and the dot pattern that we just added. So what if we need to change, for example, this background for different options? Let's think for example, that you have product that have different headers for each section, and on each section, you want to display something related with that specific page. In this case, right now, what we have is that every time that you use this header will display a plane. So we need to remove that by using a variable. Let me show you. For example, I want to include a variable here. And here in Modyo, we have the concept of variables in this area. And to create a new variable, just go to this section, and I want to create a new name called header image. So let's include it here in name, header, space, img. And if you notice, every time that I include a space, it will be replaced by a dash sign. So just remember that. Avoid to include capitalized letters and that kind of special characters. It's important to just keep in lowercase without spaces or special characters. So in this case, I just want to name it header image, and just give me 1 second. I want to include a default value. So for this case, you may notice that we have this value field, and if I include a value, will be the default value. So every time I use this new variable, in case that I change it or I don't use it, it will display this value. So let's name save. And in order to use it, just find the copy button, find the place where you want to use it, and paste it. And if you notice, we're using the liquid syntax. Regarding that, you may notice that in Modyo, we use the liquid language. It's an open source language, and it's very similar to other template languages that we have, that we use in JavaScript frameworks, such as Angular, React, or Vue. And the only thing that you need to include is the name of the value that you want to add, wrapped between curly brackets. Okay, let's save it. And now we have enabled a variable here in this widget. Let's keep on working on this code now that we have a more interactive widget. Let's go to the HTML section. And here we can include two different values. We already have the header image, so we can use a new variable called header main text. In this case, I can include a default value called lorem ipsum and save it. Just in case that you need to change anything on the values that you're including, keep in mind that just by clicking here on the edit button, you can modify the values, or if you need to remove it, just click here to fully delete this variable. Okay, now I need a secondary text. Without any value. And the align for the image. This variable will help me to display the image in a different position. This is how I'm going to use it. And in this case, I want to include these limited override values. Let me show you. First, clicking here. And once you click in here, that the behavior that we have for this variable is that it's not only showing string, a text string, but we're going to use drop the menu. Let me show you here. So just include values separated by a new line. And if you want to create or define the default value, just add an asterisk. So in this case, every time that I click on header align, I will have a drop down menu, and the right value will be the default selected value. Let's click on save. And right now we have 4 different variables here to use on this header widget. So now it's time to include them. As you may notice, we have here the dummy text. So I want to replace this header text for the value that we include on header main. So you can use, for example, the header main text. We can click on copy and just paste it in here. And now that is replaced. I believe that this one have, let me check. Yeah, we have a lorem ipsum value by default. So I'm going to save it and let's check how it looks on the preview. And if you may notice, now I have the default value for this image and also the default value for the lorem ipsum, or I mean for the header text, which is lorem ipsum. So let's keep on working on this. And for the secondary text, we can use the same process, including the secondary text value. Also, we have the header line. So in this case, instead of using just a string to display text, I want to use it as a way to include a class. So let's find here in the second line, notice that we're using bootstrap classes. So I'm going to include the value from header line. If you may notice here, let me edit. We have 3 different values. I am using the same class names as you can use on Bootstrap. So if you include the left value on a div class, that means that the elements inside it will be aligned to the left. So I'm just reusing the class that is already part of Bootstrap to convert it into a variable and use it as a parameter in this widget. So now we can align and configure the alignment of this widget. Good. I think that we already have all the variables here that we need. Let me check. I'm gonna click on save. And if you notice, once I click on save, every single one of the variables list that I have will display the in use field. That means we're using this variable inside the HTML or the style sheet file. Let me check. I noticed that we have a typo here. Good. So we have all the values that are required are part of this widget. Keep in mind that if you, for example, create a new variable and it's not part of the of the of the widget, it is possible that it's not displayed here as in use, and that means you can remove it or make sure that it's in use. Okay, so basically we have this header ready. Let me check if we already have all the settings. Yeah, it's ready for publish. Once we click on publish, it means that it's possible for every other user of this website to include the widget inside any other page. And also, if you notice here, we have a red display which every single change that we made. And in the other side, on the right side, we have on the right side, we have the changes on green. So it's pretty useful to just at a glance, you can verify that every change that we have or every change that you made is pretty easy to detect everything that's modified. Also, it's important to know that you can work on several different widgets and choose which widget will be published. For example, here, just as we do with the pages, I can choose which pages are published, or in this case, I decide to not publish any of the pages that we have. So let's click on publish. And now we have this header HTML file ready to work. So in this case, for this example, I want to use 3 different pages, but want to use just 2 widgets. And in this case, every widget will behave differently. So we need to create another widget. And here in the source files, we have the banner widget. So you can use those files to start working on your widget if you are following this example. And I'm gonna name it banner, and basically repeat the process. So in this case, I want to include a banner, something that will display information. It's not a header, it's just something that is right behind it. So for the style sheet, we have a couple of classes, and we mostly rely on Bootstrap in this case. So let's go to the HTML, and here I have the basic code for this example. Okay. So the behavior I want in this case is that I want to include some new variables, and I need that this widget change the behavior according to the values present. So if we don't have a value, maybe the widget can adapt to that and change the look and feel. So how can I do this? If you notice here, I am using the style property inside a div. This is not a good practice, but let me show you why I'm using it. The first thing is that I need to create a couple of variables here. So let's go to variables and start working on this. Just follow me using the name and values. So start with the button text. This will be a value with learn more string. Click on save. New variable. Now we're going to use a background image, and it's important to keep it blank. So just save it. We're gonna use this later. We can include a button URL. For example, if we have here a button, we can include the URL we want to drive our users. So button URL, leave it blank. Background color. We can also leave it blank. For text color, which is the next variable I'm going to use, let's click on enable limited override values, and I will add two different values, text dark and text white. Those two are part of the Bootstrap classes, so I'm just reusing values. Okay. Also make sure that include text white as the default value. Okay, text color. Now button class. If you're familiar with buttons on Bootstrap, you may know some of the classes that we already have for them. For example, button dark, button light, button danger. And in this case, I'm going to select button primary as the default value and include all those different values. Just to make sure that you're following the same classes that we have. In this case, we have a lot. So let's check on Bootstrap buttons, classes. Let me show you. As you may notice, here we have the primary, secondary, success, danger, the same classes that we have already here, which are part of Bootstrap. Those are the one I'm using here. Just copy and paste. Okay. That will be it for the button class. Now let's go for a header value. Create a new one, new variable, header. And let's add a value here. Hello world. We're almost there. Just need one more variable, which is main text. I promise this is the last one. And the value, this is a simple hero unit. Save it. You can include whatever you want in this part. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different variables. Let me check. Yeah, 8 different variables. And the next step is to include them in the HTML. So we're going to use a little bit of tricks that we have using Liquid. For example, in Liquid, we can include basic logic statements. For example, here I'm going to use curly brace with model sign. And using this syntax, I can include an if. So what I'm going to check in this case, what if I can check if the background image value, remember that we have here the background image value, you can copy just by using this button and including here. So now I'm verifying that the background image is present, or at least a value, it's present here on this widget. Basically, by using the syntax, I know that the background image is not blank. So knowing that, I can include an if, and also I need to close it in here. And in this case, this block will be displayed only if we have a background image value. So since right now we have a default value of blank, if we just use this widget, basically this element will not display. So let's change it using an else if statement, which we already have some on Liquid. Here I'm just reusing the same concept using the if, but in this case, I am using the else if statement using the background color, okay? So in the case I am using a background image or a background color, we can have different behaviors, okay? Right now, I need to move or include here a background. And the statement is, if the background image have some value, here we display this CSS. And in the case that we have the background color with any value, it will be display this other value, okay? Now, we need to include a couple of variables here. For example, in the URL, now that we know we have a background image value, I can include it. This way, also, I can make sure that I am not included any possible potential bug that I am calling a value that it's not present on the widget. So let's go to background image, copy here, and include it in this part. That means this will be displayed as a part of the background image. Now we have this part using the logical conditions on Liquid. Also, let's include here text color. For text color, let's include here in the first line. Let's find the text color, copy here, and include the class. Remember that we're using Bootstrap classes. If we click on save, the system will display the variables that we have in use, which is pretty useful to detect which are the variables that we still need to work. Okay, so let's move to header. We already have here dummy text that we are going to replace with header text. Great. Now, same with main text. Copy here, remove, paste, and the button text. You know how it works. Just remove and replace. Okay. So we can include here another element. What if we need to make that this text only be shown if we have, for example, a link? This way, in the widget, we can just show text. And in case we need to include, for example, a call to action, the button will be displayed. Let's include this by using another if here right after the button. And this will be displayed only if we have a text for the button. Okay. And the last variable that we need, it's the button URL. We still need to include two more. So let's copy the button URL and come here, include the button URL and the button class right after the btn class to display the bootstrap classes here in this button. Okay, let's save. And it's time to publish. We can check a preview of this banner element. Basically, it's a block with text. And if you notice, it's displaying the default values that we include on the variables. So it's working great, exactly as expected. Let's click on publish. Publish now. Okay, it's ready. Just before I move, a little tip: if you need to remove widget, remember that first you need to unpublish, and once it's not published, you can click on archive, and that will remove the widget from the system. It's important to keep that flow to prevent any error or any misinterpretation, just to make sure that the element is removed by your will and that you're 100% sure that you want to remove this widget. Okay, let's move to pages, and it's time to ensemble this element. So here in this case, we have one page, which is the home page, and I need to include the header widget. And let's check here. If you notice that in the add widgets, I already used the HTML previously, and we have different kind of widgets, which are basically basic elements that you can use for your websites to accelerate the process. But we also have the custom widgets. If we click here on, for example, header, just by clicking it, I will add it to my system. In a previous example, I just include one HTML element. And if you notice the HTML element, let's repeat it just to show you. It does include one HTML editor. In this case, let's remove it. Since we're using a widget that is already created and we're just deploying one part of this element inside our pages that we can reuse, if we click here, you will notice that we have access to modify the values of our variables. So we have the customized variables, and this way we can create a unique widget. Just keep in mind that in this case, I'm using a very basic, very simple widget, and the limit is the sky. whatever you want to customize using your widget. You can also use one super smart widget for all your websites that it could be customizable. So let's go back to this header and start customizing it. The first thing I need to do with this header is to include images. So how do I include these images? First thing I need to, for example, here, I want to go to the file manager. So click on here on back to sites, and this is just one tip. You can open in the link in a new tab. It will be easier just to go to content, asset manager, select the file that you want to include. For example, here I have some files that I will include, and remember to click on there and use the asset URL. And just repeat this process during the rest of this example. Now that we know how to retrieve that URL, just click here on header image, and I'm going to include one specific image that I already stored. Keep the header aligned right. Here on the main text, we can change it instead of the lorem ipsum. Change for text that we have here. You won't find better benefits anywhere else. Yeah, you bet. Let's remove the header secondary text and include this small text. Click on save. And now we have this customized header with customized values inside our page. If you need to change something, for example, it is very possible that you find errors during the development process. If you click here on edit widget, will be you will be moved to this section, and you can edit specifically your widget. Just FYI. So now we have this header with the custom values, and it's time to include the banners. In this case, I have a layout that just include one kind of elements, and I don't like that. So let's go to properties and change it the grid here. For example, I want to include one with a big header and 3 different banners. This is the one for me. Great. And if you notice, now we have the changes reflected here in the page where we can include the header and 3 different banners. Let's save and go back to add widgets. Now I need to include another banner, and I can drag it here. And it's just a matter of customizing. So now, for example, in this case, I want to include text color dark. Change the default value to text dark. Leave the background image just as is. The background color, change it to this color I already chose. Change the header. No more hello world. And the main text, just include more text. I include a lorem ipsum. And leave the other fields blank, just with the default values. Save it. Include another banner. And repeat the process here. So in this case, the second banner will be pretty similar. In this case, I'm going to use the same background color. Background image blank. Text color dark, just like the other. Here in the header, you can have a new banner, something like travel insurance. Keep the main text with lorem ipsum, just to display something, and leave the other fields blank. Save, and the last banner here. If you notice, every banner can be customized with different values. So it's very powerful to include smart widgets. Let's add another one. You may notice that I'm using the same configuration. So text dark, background image blank, background color with the same value. Include a header with something like support center, and the old lorem ipsum with the rest of the fields blank. Save it, and let's check out the results with the preview. Now keep in mind that I'm using the same two widgets. The first one is the header. Now that we can include text, it looks better now. Now that we have an explanation, links, different elements here in our widgets. And let me show you, just to make sure that we have time to display everything. Let me show you how to include more elements reusing the same widgets, but with a different look and feel. Let's go back to pages. And in this case, I'm gonna click and select this second page. 1 second. Here, for example, I want to use a different grid with one main element and two different contents. In this case, I will use the same header, but customize it with different values. So in this case, let's use another image for the header. We can change the align. Instead of right, we can move it to the left. And the main text, something like better banking. And secondary text as well. Save it. And now I will include two different banners. And remember, they are basically the same as the one that we use on the front page, but let's change the look and feel. For example, here in the text color, we can use the text white, keep it in that way. And the background image, an image that I already uploaded here, which is news 01. Leave the background color blank. Header, something like operating offices. Main text, why not? We can change the button text that we left by default in the other one. And even change the button class. For example, here we can change it instead of primary, we can change the value to light. And finally, we can include a button URL. I just keep it blank. And the last widget today, another banner. Using similar values. So again, here, text color, we can keep it white. Background image, let's include a different image. Keep the background color blank. A different header. Different main text. The button class light, just like the other. And let's keep the learn more and the button URL by default. Save it. and check the preview. So now we have a very different result from the other website. Let's publish both just to browse between them, and you can see the differences. Okay, now we have published. Let's go to home. And in this case, we're using the same elements, but if you notice the header, it's completely different from the second example. We have different align, different text. Same happens with the banners. We have images in the background, and since we're using logical elements, such as the ones that we include using Liquid, we have a completely HTML and CSS here. But we keep using and taking advantage of the Bootstrap library. Let me show you one example that I have with another widget using the same exact widgets. Example here. Yeah, using the same configuration here, I can use a different layout. For example, here I'm using a different class just to center the images instead of using just the left and right concepts. Here in this case, I'm using a center image that it's displayed different, just a class, so I can include whatever the class I want and the behavior and look and feel I need. Same happens um, with the banner. In this case, remember that we're using a conditional to display the button at the end of the text. So in this case, I am not using that. So it's displayed just like another text block. So this way you can use the same widget in several different um, layouts and look and feels. And for example, if you finished working on a page, let's pretend that I am working on this specific widget that I already have configured and I already invested a lot of work. So I just need to come here to, for example, not in home, but using any other, for example, here in examples, here. One that I already include customization. I can click in here, click in clone, and the same values that I used for customization of my widgets will be cloned, so your work will not be will be used every time. So it will not be wasted every time you need to create another page. And same happens in the case that you need to clone one page. For example, here we have reusable widgets webinar. Let's go back to sites and let me type reusable. Here, reusable widget webinar, and let's go back. I click that reusable widget webinar. I click here, and if you click here in clone, every single widget that is linked to this page and the configuration that we already have will be cloned to another web page. So that means that if you invest time working on really smart widgets, if you customized as you need, you can reuse your work several times and create very fast pages. And this is a way that Modyo have to improve your speed creating websites. That's pretty much it. I don't know if we have, let me check questions, if we have any questions. Thank you very much for your time, for our participants. If you guys have any questions, if you want to know anything related with the concept that we're working, and please feel free to ask. And in the case that no one have a question now, we will send you later this webinar to your inbox, and will be available in Modyo Modyo community website. So feel free to check our materials, and remember that um, in the case that you have any questions, we always have the modyo.com/community section. Please feel free to check the materials that we have here. We keep updating that constantly, and we like to include questions from our users, and every time that someone asks us something that is interesting that someone else can use, we can include it, and that's something we like to include here in the developer tips or any other material that we have for you. So if we don't have any questions yet, um, yeah. I have a question related with the source material that we have here, and remember that, like I mentioned, it will be here in the resources community, and here we have not only this webinar, every other webinar that we have here in English or Spanish, you can find it in here. Or as always, remember that we have an extensive documentation where you can have answers for any question that you may have related with Modyo. Thank you very much for your time. Have a great time, and see you in the next webinar.